Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. The first time I climbed into the toll plaza control booth after everything broke, I didn't do it because I thought it was some brilliant plan. I did it because it was raining hard enough to turn the shoulder into mud. I hadn't slept in 2 days, and the open lanes below felt like a stage with no curtains. Up there, above the canopy in the lanes, the air smelled like wet concrete, old wiring, and stale coffee. The glass was the first thing I noticed. Thick, slightly green at the edges. The kind of bullet-resistant laminate you only see around cash operations. It wasn't a bunker, but it wasn't a gas station office either. I'm not a soldier, I'm a toll systems technician. Was, anyway. I spent 9 years keeping easy pass readers online, swapping lane controllers, running fiber checks, and arguing with procurement about why a $10 relay matters when it fails at 3 in the morning. My badge used to get me through doors that said authorized personnel only. That badge meant nothing now, but the knowledge did. I knew where the stairwell went, where the maintenance ladder came up, and which panel fed the booth's lights. I knew what was supposed to be in the cabinets, what would still be there if nobody looted it yet, and what would be valuable even without the rest of the system running. The toll plaza I chose sits on Interstate 95 just south of Wilmington, Delaware, near the Delaware Memorial Bridge approach. One of those places you drove through 100 times and never looked at twice. In normal life, it was all brake lights and horn taps and people counting quarters like it mattered. Now, the lanes were empty. Not late night empty. Empty like a photo in a textbook. Cars were frozen where drivers had abandoned them, angled across lanes, doors open, hazard lights long dead. A couple of tractor trailers sat jackknifed like someone had tried to turn them into a wall and failed halfway. Down below, the infected wandered in the spaces between bumpers. They moved like the city had been poured out onto the highway and left to dry. They didn't patrol. They drifted. Their paths weren't random, not exactly. They followed sound when it came. They followed movement. Sometimes they gathered under the overpass for no reason I could see, like birds roosting under a bridge. When the wind carried anything, a distant car alarm, a dog barking in a subdivision, metal banging against metal from somewhere unknown, their heads turned as one, and the whole mass would bend toward it. I had learned that lesson before I ever stepped into the booth. 2 miles north, I'd tried sheltering in my own pickup behind an abandoned rest area, thinking I could ride out a night and keep moving. The problem with a pickup is that it's a box with windows. Even if nobody is chasing you, you're still trapped by your own fear. Every shadow becomes a person. Every sound becomes a crowd. In the dark, the open highway doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like being seen. So I climbed. The booth was a rectangular room perched above the lanes, accessed by a concrete stairwell tower on the west side and a vertical steel maintenance ladder on the east side. The stairwell door was heavy steel with a panic bar inside, meant for staff to evacuate during a fire drill no one ever took seriously. The ladder hatch was a square plate on the floor with a pull ring and a latch that, in normal operations, would be just enough to keep kids from climbing up. Just enough isn't a category that matters anymore. I dropped my pack, pulled the hatch open, and leaned over. The ladder disappeared into darkness that smelled like rust and damp. I pictured a person climbing up without making a sound, their hands steady, their face set, because hunger and fear make people quiet. I pictured it enough times that I didn't need more motivation. I did what I always did at work when a system was unsafe. I shut it down, then I made it hard to turn back on. There was a small maintenance closet inside the booth. Thin metal door, keyed lock. the kind of place that holds cleaning supplies and a first aid kit the size of a paperback. The first thing I found was a coil of safety wire and a battered toolbox with an old arc welder's chipping hammer. That told me what I needed. Someone, at some point, had done patchwork up here. If patchwork was possible, reinforcing was possible. The ladder hatch had a frame of thin steel. I didn't have the luxury of proper fabrication, but I had two things that are worth more than skill when time is short: leverage and stubbornness. Down in lane 3, a maintenance truck sat half on the curb, half in a lane, with a weathered logo for a contractor I recognized. Their bed box was locked. Most people would see that and move on. I saw it and thought, they use the same lock cores. I know what keys open those. In my pocket, I still had a ring with a couple of old contractor keys from past jobs. Nobody ever asked for them back, and techs collect them like poker chips. One of them turned. The box door swung open with a squeal like a complaint. Inside were treasures in the language of survival. A portable generator that smelled of old gasoline, a stack of angle iron, a grinder with 2 spare discs, a half-full spool of extension cord, a bucket of bolts and washers, and, best of all, a small inverter welder still in its case. It wasn't a shop machine. It was the kind you plug into a generator and pray over. But it was a welder. Getting it up the stairwell was a problem I could solve with patience and pain. I worked in short bursts. I listened more than I moved. Every time a piece of metal clanked, I froze. Below, the infected shifted toward the sound, heads cocked, bodies turning. But the booth was high enough that the sound didn't translate into a clear target. They didn't climb the stairs like in movies. They just gathered at the base, wandering in tight circles, bumping into the concrete like moths at a porch light. On my third trip, I saw something that made my stomach go cold. Fresh footprints in the dust on the plaza's administrative walkway. Not mine. Too wide, too clean-edged. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't been dragging their feet the way the infected did. That changed the timetable in my head from fortify eventually to fortify now. I hauled the welder up, set it on a rubber mat, and ran through the booth's electrical panel with my eyes. The main feed was dead. No grid power, but the booth had its own battery backup cabinet for the lane controllers. Sealed lead-acid batteries in a rack with a charger that, in normal life, kept everything stable through brief outages. The batteries were half drained, but not ruined. I didn't have a multimeter at first, so I did it the old way. I checked for swelling, heat, leaks, everything looked intact. When I got the generator running later, I could recharge them slowly, which meant I could have silent power at night. Lights low, radio on, no engine noise to advertise myself. Before power, though, came the doors. The ladder hatch was the most immediate vulnerability. I cut 2 lengths of angle iron and laid them across the hatch opening like bars. I drilled through the hatch frame with a cordless drill I found in the same contractor box. Battery low, but enough, and bolted the angle iron in place with washers on both sides. Then I welded the bolt heads. Not because it made them stronger, but because it made them slower to remove. Time is the real lock. The more time someone needs, the more chances you have to notice, react, and survive. I shut the hatch and welded the latch itself, running a bead that would have made any professional laugh. It wasn't pretty. It didn't need to be. It needed to hold against fingers and desperation. Next was the stairwell door. A steel door is only as good as its frame. If you kick the frame, the door doesn't matter. I scavenged a steel channel from the canopy support where a sign had been ripped away, and I fitted it like a brace across the door, anchored into concrete with expansion bolts. I didn't have a hammer drill, so I improvised. I used a masonry bit and a lot of patience. The bit screamed, the infected stirred, and I stopped every 30 seconds to listen. By the time the brace was in, my hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from the kind of fatigue that makes your muscles forget what they're for. When I finally closed the door from the inside and slid the brace into place, the booth felt different. It didn't feel safe. Nothing felt safe anymore, but it felt like mine. I spent the first night sitting on the floor, back against the battery cabinet, with my crowbar across my knees like it could solve anything. I didn't sleep more than a minute at a time. Every time the wind shifted, I heard voices in it. Every time a car door banged somewhere down the highway, I thought someone was testing me. At 2:14 a.m., a light flickered down near the abandoned Plaza office building. A quick flash, like a phone screen, turned on and off. Not infected, people. I lowered myself to the floor and crawled to the booth's window, keeping my silhouette low. The bullet-resistant glass was tinted, and the interior was dark. I angled my head until I could see the base of the stairwell tower. Two figures moved between the cars. One held a flashlight wrapped in cloth to narrow the beam. The other carried something long, maybe a rifle, maybe a pry bar. They spoke in whispers I couldn't hear, but their body language was clear. They were hunting for opportunity. They came to the stairwell door and tested it, careful at first. The door didn't budge. They tried again, harder. One of them leaned in, studied the brace, then stepped back and pointed toward the canopy supports, as if considering climbing. My welded ladder hatch suddenly felt like the best decision I'd made in weeks. They didn't leave. They sat in the shadow of a box truck and watched the tower like you watch a locked vending machine when you're deciding whether it's worth smashing. I stayed still for so long my legs went numb. I kept my breathing shallow. I kept my thoughts even shallower. Eventually, they moved away, melting back into the lanes. But I didn't relax. People don't test a door in the middle of the night if they're just passing through. They come back. The morning brought a pale winter sun and a wind that made the booth creak. I used the daylight to map the world from my windows. From up there, the highway looked like a riverbed after a flood. Debris everywhere, but with a direction to it. To the north, the Wilmington skyline was a smear of gray. To the south, the highway bent towards Newark and the Maryland line. The toll plaza itself sat like an island with cars stranded around it, as if the last normal traffic jam had petrified. I made rules for myself before I did anything else. Rule 1. No noise unless necessary. Rule 2. No movement in open lanes unless I had a reason and a route. Rule 3. Never assume the infected are the biggest problem. I found more supplies in the booth than I expected. The old cash drawer station had been emptied, but the cabinets held office basics: duct tape, zip ties, a couple of reflective vests, a box of nitrile gloves, and a stack of laminated emergency procedure sheets. The sheets were useless as instructions now, but they were useful as reminders of how the world used to be organized. In the maintenance closet, I found a small fire extinguisher, a handful of road flares, and a trauma kit that had expired years ago but still had bandages and antiseptic wipes. I also found a radio base station, an old VHF unit used to talk to maintenance crews. Without a repeater, its range would be limited, but from this elevation, I might reach someone. That became my first real project, communication. The booth had a roof access hatch that led to a narrow platform, just enough room for a person to stand and serve as a camera mount. I opened it carefully, expecting rust, and it moved with a groan that made me wince. Outside, the wind hit me like a slap. I crawled onto the roof platform and looked at the mounts. One camera had been ripped off. Another still pointed down at lane 5 like it was waiting for the next commuter. The mast was still there, a short steel pole with a bracket, perfect for an antenna. I climbed back down, dug through the booth's storage, and found coax cable. Thick, black, industrial, the kind that feeds cameras and antennas. I wasn't going to make it perfect. I was going to make it work. I mounted the antenna using hose clamps and a strip of aluminum I cut from a broken sign. I routed the coax through the hatch and into the booth, sealing the gap with duct tape and foam from a chair cushion. Any gap is an invitation for weather, and weather is an enemy that never sleeps. By noon, I had the radio powered from the battery cabinet and tuned as best I could by ear and instinct. I didn't have a full setup, no SWR meter, no fancy gear, just enough to listen and maybe speak. The airwaves weren't dead. They were thin. Most of what I heard was static, but every few minutes I caught fragments. Someone calling for anyone near Route 1, someone warning about bridge traffic, someone repeating the same message in a tired voice. If you're south of Wilmington, do not go into the city. I waited until I heard a pause. Then I keyed the mic and spoke slowly. This is a civilian at the I-95 toll plaza near the Delaware Memorial Bridge approach. Elevated booth, secure. I can relay messages. If you copy, respond with your call sign or name. My voice sounded too loud in the small room, even though it was just the radio. For 10 seconds, nothing. Then a voice, faint but clear enough to make my chest tighten. Elevated booth. Say again, this is Mason. You alone? I swallowed. Alone right now. Name's Caleb. Toll systems tech. I've got height and visibility. I can watch lanes and warn about movement. Mason paused. Copy, Caleb. We're 3 miles west, Farm Road, staying quiet. We've got 2 adults, 1 teen. We're low on clean water. You seeing anything that looks like a working pump or a place not overrun? I looked down at the plaza office building, at the parking lot, at the abandoned maintenance truck. There's a maintenance building on site, but I haven't entered, too exposed. I can scout if I can do it without pulling a crowd. Don't risk it if you don't have to, Mason said. The voice had the flat calm of someone who had already risked too much. If you find bottled water in trucks, that's safer. Keep your height. Height is life. Height is life. That sentence landed in me like a rule that should have always existed. After that, the booth stopped being just a hiding place. It became a position. Positions come with problems. Food was the first. I had some snacks in my pack. Protein bars, peanuts, a couple cans of soup I'd grabbed from home in a blind panic. It would last maybe 4 days if I rationed hard. The booth had no fridge, no pantry. I needed a supply line, and my supply line was a graveyard of vehicles. The abandoned cargo trucks were the obvious answer, and they were also the worst answer. They sat in open lanes with no cover, surrounded by infected that drifted like slow smoke. If I walked down there, I would become the loudest thing in their world. If I ran, I'd trigger them. If I lingered, I'd be trapped. So I watched first. I spent 2 full days doing nothing but observing. I marked patterns like I was back at work tracking intermittent faults. At 7:30 a.m., when the sun hit the west side of the plaza, the infected tended to drift toward the shade under the overpass. They moved less when the light was bright. At 11 a.m., when the wind picked up, they stirred more, as if the movement of air made them restless. At dusk, around 4:45 p.m. in this cold season, they became unpredictable, clustering when distant sounds carried farther. The most important discovery was this: they were drawn to sharp noises more than continuous ones. A brief metal clang, a car door slam, glass breaking, those snapped their attention. A constant low hum, like wind or a generator at a distance, made them look but didn't always pull them. That meant if I had to use the generator, I should do it in daylight, and I should keep it isolated with padding so the vibration didn't transmit through the booth's steel frame. It also meant that if someone else wanted to lure them, they could. That thought came back later in a way I didn't like. On the third morning, I made my first run. I prepared like it was a job, not a gamble. I laid out what I needed and what I could carry. I wrapped metal tools in cloth. I taped loose straps. I wore a reflective vest, not because it helped me, but because it was bright enough to make me visible to human eyes at a distance if someone was watching. Sometimes being seen is safety. Sometimes it's the opposite. I didn't know which one it would be, but I couldn't afford to pretend people weren't out there. I chose the closest truck, a box truck with a grocery distributor logo, parked at an angle behind two sedans. Its cargo door was closed but not locked. If it was food, it would be worth it. If it was empty, it would still be worth it for anything sealed. Water, packaged goods, maybe even blankets. I waited until 10:15 a.m. when the infected were mostly under the overpass and the wind was steady. Then I moved. Down the stairwell, out the door, across the maintenance walkway, and into the lanes. Every step felt like stepping onto thin ice. I didn't rush. I didn't freeze. I moved like I belonged there because panic is a scent in its own way. I kept my eyes up, scanning for heads turning. Two infected were near the box truck, drifting between the sedans. Their clothes were stained with road dirt and rain, their movements slow, their attention unfocused. I angled wide, using the sedans as visual cover, and I reached the cargo door. My fingers found the latch. I pulled it up gently, no snap, no clank, and lifted. The door rolled up 2 feet before the mechanism squeaked. The heads below the overpass turned. I held still, heart punching my ribs. The squeak faded into the wind. The infected near me didn't react. Farther away, a few shapes shifted, but the distance seemed to blur the source. I lifted again, slower, controlling the roll. The door rose enough to duck under. Inside, the air smelled like cardboard and sweet rot. The truck had carried produce at some point, but most of it had been looted. Still, behind a toppled pallet, I found cases of bottled water, half crushed but sealed, and a stack of canned goods that someone had missed in the rush. Beans, peaches, soup, peanut butter. I loaded what I could into a plastic tote and dragged it out, keeping the tote low to the ground so it didn't scrape loudly. My shoulders burned, my throat went dry. Halfway back, the wind shifted, and from the north came a faint, hollow noise, like a siren dying slowly. The infected reacted instantly, not charging but converging, drawn toward the sound. They began to drift away from me, toward the north lanes. It was a gift and a warning at the same time. I used the gift. I crossed the last open stretch and reached the stairwell door with the tote. I hauled it inside, closed the door, slid the brace, and didn't breathe normally until I was back in the booth with the glass between me and the world. I ate 2 crackers and a mouthful of peanut butter like it was a banquet. That afternoon, I keyed the radio to Mason. Found bottled water and canned goods in a grocery box truck on site. I can spare some, but moving it off the plaza would be risky. Mason's voice came back, relief hidden under caution. Copy. Don't bring it to us. That's too exposed. If we can move at night along the service road, maybe we can meet you near the west stairwell tower. I stared at the stairwell window, night meetings, shadows, people. We'll plan it, but I need to tell you something. There were fresh footprints here before. Not mine. Someone else is watching this place. Mason didn't answer immediately. When he did, his tone had changed. Then plan, like you're not the only one who thinks your booth is valuable. That was the moment I stopped thinking of myself as someone hiding and started thinking like someone defending. Defense isn't just walls. Defense is routine. Defense is discipline. I organized the booth like I organized a maintenance cabinet at work. Food in one corner, water in another. Tools hung on improvised hooks made from bent wire. Batteries checked and labeled. I found a ledger notebook in the office supplies and started writing everything down. Dates, runs, radio contacts, supply counts. Panic erases memory. Paper doesn't. For weapons, I didn't pretend I could outgun a desperate group, but I could make myself hard to take. From the maintenance truck, I found a road spud wrench. Heavy steel, good leverage. I found a claw hammer, a crowbar, a folding utility knife. Later, from a state DOT pickup abandoned near the plaza office, I recovered a 12-gauge pump shotgun locked in a rack. The key wasn't in the truck. The rack could have been cut. I didn't cut it. Not because I didn't want it. Because the noise of cutting metal would turn the plaza into a magnet, and a shotgun without a safe place to use it is just another problem. People love the idea of firearms until they remember the first rule: sound travels. Instead, I focused on what I could do quietly. I made a spear out of a broken broom handle and a utility blade, lashed tight with zip ties and tape. It wasn't elegant. It was a way to keep distance in a stairwell if something ever got inside. I made a second one as backup. I practiced moving with it in the narrow space, learning where it would catch and where it would slide. I hated that part, training myself to treat my little booth like a battlefield. But survival doesn't care what you hate. On day 6, I saw the scavengers again. This time it was daylight, around 1:20 p.m. 2 vehicles rolled down the northbound lanes, a gray SUV and a white pickup with a ladder rack. They drove slowly, weaving around abandoned cars with the caution of people who had learned what happens when you ram into a dead vehicle at speed. They stopped near the plaza office building. 4 people got out. They were dressed for work, not for fantasy. Heavy jackets, jeans, gloves. One had a hunting rifle slung across his chest. Another carried a baseball bat wrapped in tape. They didn't look like movie villains. That's what scared me. One of them pointed up at the booth. I sank back from the window. The bullet-resistant glass suddenly felt like a spotlight. They moved with purpose. 2 toward the office building, 2 toward the stairwell tower. I watched from a narrow angle where I could see without being obvious. The 2 at the stairwell door tested it. When it didn't open, they spoke, and one of them stepped back, looking up the tower as if measuring it. Then the one with the bat did something that made my skin crawl. He took a piece of metal, maybe a tire iron, and struck the concrete wall 3 times, sharp, echoing bangs. The infected under the overpass stirred. He struck again, louder, then stepped away. It wasn't random. It was bait. They were trying to pull the infected toward the stairwell tower. Toward me, maybe hoping the noise and movement would force me to reveal myself. Or maybe they just wanted to see how secure the tower really was when pressure came. I stayed still. The infected drifted toward the sound, gathering at the base of the tower. They pressed into the concrete, wandering, bumping shoulders. The scavengers backed away, satisfied, and watched. Minutes passed. The infected didn't climb. They didn't figure out the door. They just collected in a restless cluster. The scavengers looked bored. One shrugged. The other tried the door again, then gave up. They left, returning to their vehicles, but they didn't drive away right away. They parked the SUV at an angle where it had a view of the tower, then sat inside. A stakeout. I keyed the radio, but I didn't call Mason. I listened first. The airwaves were quiet, like everyone had learned silence was safer than hope. Finally, I called anyway, voice low. Mason, this is Caleb. 4 scavengers on Plaza, 2 vehicles. They're watching my stairwell tower. Mason responded quickly. Copy, don't engage, don't show yourself. If they can't get in, they'll either leave or try again later. If they try fire, you'll have to make a call. Fire. I looked at the extinguisher. I looked at the booth's carpet tile floor. I looked at the battery cabinet. Fire was the one thing the glass and steel couldn't politely ignore. For 3 hours, the scavengers waited. The infected cluster slowly dispersed when the noise stopped. The scavengers got out once to stretch, once to check the office building again. They ate something from a bag like they were on a long road trip. They acted like they owned the place. At 4:50 p.m., the sun dipped and the wind shifted. The air cooled fast. That's when they changed tactics. 2 of them walked to the base of the maintenance ladder on the east side of the structure, the one I had welded shut from above. They looked up. One of them tried climbing, then realized the hatch was sealed. He didn't get angry. He got thoughtful. He walked back to the pickup, pulled out a long aluminum extension ladder, and carried it toward the side of the toll canopy supports. They weren't trying to climb the ladder shaft anymore. They were trying to reach the booth roof access from the outside. My mouth went dry. I had planned for the internal ladder. I had planned for the stairwell. I had not planned for a portable ladder placed against the steel framework like a bridge. I dropped to the floor, crawled to the roof hatch, and listened. Metal scraped. Soft curses carried on the wind. They were setting up. I didn't have a firearm. I didn't have a clean way to scare them off without inviting every infected within a mile. But I did have one advantage. I knew this structure. The canopy supports weren't designed for climbing. They were designed to carry weight down into concrete. They had cross braces, awkward angles, and gaps. A ladder placed wrong would slip. A ladder placed right would still be unstable if someone moved too quickly. I needed them to quit without forcing a showdown. I took a road flare from the box, crept to the window facing the east side, and cracked it just enough to slide the flare out. I didn't light it, not yet. I waited until one of them started climbing the ladder. I could see his boots on the rungs, careful, slow. Then I did something that felt insane and also felt like the only option. I dropped the unlit flare so it clattered on the steel beam below him. The sharp metallic clack rang out. The climber froze. The others looked up. Their attention snapped to the structure, to the booth, to the idea that someone was awake up there. Before any of them could speak, I lit the flare inside the booth, shielded the bright red glow behind my body, and held it up to the glass for half a second, just a flash, then pulled it back and went dark again. Not a signal for help. A warning. I'm here. I'm alert. You won't take this quietly. The effect was immediate. The climber scrambled down faster than he had climbed, boots slipping slightly. The one on the ground stepped back, scanning the lanes as if expecting infected to converge. And they did. Not from the flare's light, but from the earlier clatter and the quick movement. The infected under the overpass shifted, bodies turning toward the east side where sound had carried. They didn't sprint. They flowed. The scavengers backed away, suddenly aware that the toll plaza wasn't theirs to play with. They abandoned the ladder where it was, jumped into the SUV and pickup, and drove south, engines revving high enough that I could feel the vibration through the booth floor. I didn't celebrate, I didn't laugh. I just sat down and stared at my hands, because I had shown them something. And people remember. That night, at 9:30 p.m., Mason called me without prompting. "You still there?" "I'm here." We saw headlights from the south. The same vehicles. 2 vehicles earlier, yes. They left before dark. Mason's voice tightened. "Then listen, we're moving tonight. We can't stay on the farm road, too much foot traffic. If you can, meet us with water at the West Tower base at 11 p.m. I looked out at the highway. The infected were dispersed now, but night changed everything. Sound carried differently. Shadows lied more convincingly. Still, Mason had helped me without even being here, just by being a voice in the static. "Copy," I said. "I'll be there." I prepared the drop carefully. I didn't go down with all the water. I filled 2 backpacks, one with bottled water, one with canned food, and I added a few medical supplies and spare batteries. I taped the bottles so they wouldn't rattle. I wrapped cans in cloth. Quiet matters. At 10:50 p.m., I turned off all lights and waited at the stairwell door, ear against cold steel. At 10:58 p.m., I heard it. A soft whistle, bird-like, controlled. I slid the brace aside just enough to crack the door. I kept my crowbar in my right hand. In the dim light, 3 figures stood close. 2 adults, 1 teen. They were thinner than they should have been. Their clothes were layered, mismatched. The teen held a small flashlight pointed at the ground. The man in front spoke first, voice barely above breath. "Caleb? Mason?" He nodded. In the faint light, I could see his face. Stubbled, tired, eyes too alert for someone running on too little sleep. Behind him was a woman with a knit cap pulled low and a backpack that looked heavy. The teen, maybe 15, watched everything, eyes sharp, jaw clenched. I handed the first pack out. Mason took it like it weighed nothing, but his shoulders sagged with relief. "You alone up there?" the woman whispered. "Yes." "Still think those scavengers are around?" Mason asked. "I think they'll come back," I said. "They tested, they learned. They'll try again smarter." The teen shifted. Then why stay? It was a fair question. I stared past them into the dark lanes. Because height is life. Because from up there I can see trouble coming. And because if I leave, someone else takes it, and they might not use it to help anyone. Mason nodded slowly, like he respected that logic even if it scared him. "We're heading west toward Newark back roads. There's a water treatment plant out there with fence lines. Might be defendable." "A plant?" I asked, mind already sorting possibilities. Fences, pumps, buildings, generators, danger and opportunity in equal measure. Mason shrugged. "We heard it on the radio. Someone said they saw lights. Could be real, could be a trap. Everything could be a trap." The woman adjusted her pack. "We can't take you with us, not right now, but we can trade information." "Go," I said. "Stay quiet, avoid the highway if you can." The teen looked up at the booth tower, then back at me. "If they come back, what will you do?" I wanted to say something confident. I wanted to say I had a plan that covered every angle. The truth was simpler. "I'll do what works," I said, "and I'll try not to make noise doing it." They left like shadows, slipping between cars and disappearing into the dark. I watched until I couldn't see them anymore, then climbed back up and locked myself in. The next morning, I found the ladder the scavengers had left. They hadn't taken it. They hadn't even thrown it down. That was either carelessness or confidence, like they'd be back soon and didn't want to carry it twice. I dragged it away from the canopy supports inch by inch and slid it under a pile of wrecked signs where it would be hard to spot from the road. I couldn't remove every tool from the world, but I could deny easy solutions. Then I did something I didn't want to do. I scouted the plaza office building. It sat about 100 yards from the stairwell tower, a low brick structure with glass doors and a covered walkway. In normal operations, it held staff rooms, cash processing, server racks, and the maintenance shop. If the scavengers wanted something, that building was a better target than my booth. Which meant if they searched it and found nothing, they would focus harder on the booth. I moved in daylight at 1:05 p.m. The infected were mostly under the overpass. The wind was steady. I kept my path close to vehicles and concrete barriers, using them as cover. The office doors were locked. The glass was intact. I tested the handle gently. No movement. I circled to a side door and found what I expected. A mechanical lock with a keyway I recognized. In my old life, I had a ring of facility keys that opened half the state's toll hardware. That ring was still in my pocket because I never cleaned my pockets out like a sane person. One key turned. The door opened with a sigh. Inside, the air was stale and cold. A hallway led to a break room with overturned chairs. A vending machine stood against the wall, dark, its glass front cracked. Someone had tried to tip it. They had failed. I didn't waste time. I went straight for the maintenance room. The maintenance room was the heart. Shelves, parts bins, tools, and there, mounted on the wall, exactly where it should be, was a cabinet labeled in black letters. Electrical. Inside, spare fuses, relays, wire, connectors, and a small solar charge controller still in its box. Not a full panel, but a controller is the brain you need if you ever find a panel. I grabbed it, along with a roll of 12-gauge wire and a handful of inline fuses. Then I heard a sound that stopped me cold. A faint scrape from the hallway, like a shoe on tile. I killed my movement. I listened. Another scrape, closer. Not the dragging shuffle of an infected. This was controlled. Human. I backed into the maintenance room corner where I could see the doorway. I held my crowbar low, not raised. Raised looks like aggression. Low looks like readiness. A man stepped into view, hands up slightly, palms open. He was older than me, maybe mid-40s, wearing a brown work jacket and a knit cap. He had a pistol holstered on his hip and a small flashlight clipped to his chest. His eyes flicked to my hands, then to my face. "Easy," he said quietly. Didn't know anyone was still using this building. I kept my voice steady. I could say the same. He nodded toward the booth tower, visible through a hallway window. "That you up there?" "Yes." He exhaled, slowly. "Name's Ron. Used to be Delaware DOT, bridge maintenance. I've been sleeping in a culvert west of here. I saw your flare last night." So, the warning had traveled farther than I wanted. Ron didn't move closer. He stood in the hallway like he understood what distance meant. "I'm not here for your spot," he said. "I'm here because I saw scavengers on the plaza yesterday. Same two vehicles. They were asking questions on the CB bands. They think there's money in the booth." "There isn't," I said. Ron gave a tired half-smile. "People don't care. They think toll booth and their brains go straight to cash and fuel. Fuel's the real prize. You got fuel?" "A little," I admitted. "Generator." Ron nodded. "Then you're a lighthouse, whether you want to be or not." I studied him. He had the look of someone who had worked outside for years. Hands rough, eyes squinting even indoors. He also had the calm of someone who understood infrastructure, not fantasy. "What do you want?" I asked. Ron shrugged. "Trade, information, maybe a place to stand if things get bad. I can help you reinforce that tower better than angle iron and hope. I know where the rebar runs in that concrete. I know where to anchor without cracking it." He wasn't wrong. I had done what I could with what I had, but better might be the difference between held and failed. "Why help me?" I asked. Ron's eyes went unfocused for a moment, as if he was looking at something behind me that wasn't there. "Because if the wrong people take that booth, they'll use it to trap others. They'll control the highway like it's their private road, and because I'm tired of running from the loudest person in the room." That sounded like truth. I made a decision that felt risky and also felt necessary. "Come up," I said. "But you keep your hands visible and you follow my rules." Ron nodded once. Fair. We moved together back to the stairwell tower, keeping distance from each other like two wary dogs. The infected drifted under the overpass, uninterested. When we reached the door, I slid the brace just enough to let him in, then locked it behind us. Up in the booth, Ron looked around with a professional eye, not a scavenger's hunger. He checked the window frames, the hatch, the door brace. "You welded this?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "It holds," I said. He chuckled softly. "It holds until it doesn't. But you did the right idea. Slow them down, force them to make noise." Ron opened the battery cabinet and whistled low. "You've got quiet power. That's good. You know how to manage charge rates?" "Enough," I said. "Slow charge, don't overheat, keep the generator time limited." "Good," he said. "Then here's what we do next. You need an early warning that isn't just your eyes. Trip lines. Not for traps, just for sound. A can on a string at the base of the stairwell, inside the tower. If someone gets in there, you know before they reach the door." I nodded. "I can do that." "And you need a second exit," Ron said, tapping the roof hatch. "Not the ladder. If they control the base, you're stuck. If we can rig a rope descent on the east side into the wrecked lanes, you've got an option. Options keep you alive." We spent the next 2 days working in careful, quiet bursts. Ron's knowledge was surgical. He showed me where to place anchors so the concrete wouldn't spall. He helped me reinforce the stairwell brace with a second lock bar set lower, forcing anyone trying to breach to fight 2 points instead of 1. We rigged a rope from the roof platform, a static line anchored to a structural bracket, hidden under a tarp so it wouldn't be visible from below. It wasn't comfortable, but it was an escape route. We also did something else. We created a routine. At 8 a.m., we scanned the north approach lanes. At 12 p.m., we checked the base tower for footprints. At 3 p.m., we ran the generator for 40 minutes to top off batteries, then shut it down before dusk. At 6 p.m., we ate, then went dark. Routine makes panic smaller. On the third evening, the scavengers came back. This time, there were 6 of them. They arrived just after 2:30 p.m. in 3 vehicles, the same SUV and pickup, plus a dark sedan with no plates. They parked in a loose line, using abandoned cars as cover. 2 carried long guns. 1 had a crowbar. Another had bolt cutters slung over his shoulder like he was proud of them. Ron and I watched from the booth window, silent. "They learned," Ron whispered. I nodded. They didn't test the door right away. They walked the plaza like they were doing an inspection. They looked at the ladder. They looked at the canopy supports. They pointed up at the booth, then at the office building, then back at the booth. Then one of them did the last thing I wanted. He walked to the base of the stairwell tower and poured something on the door. Liquid, probably gasoline. Fire. My throat tightened. Ron's jaw clenched so hard I could see it even in the dim light. "We can't let them do that," Ron said. "If we shouted, we'd announce ourselves. If we fired a gun, if we even had one, we'd bring infected like a tide. If we did nothing, they might smoke us out." I reached for the radio mic. Ron stopped my hand. "Not the radio, they might be listening." He was right. The same CB chatter he'd mentioned. People used anything to coordinate now. Broadcasting would tell them exactly what they wanted to know. That someone was inside, that we were scared. I thought fast, not clever, just fast. The infected were our hazard. They could also be an obstacle. The scavengers had used noise to pull infected before. They assumed it worked in their favor. So we flipped it. We took 2 road flares and a metal pan from the break room stash. Ron wrapped the pan handle with cloth. We opened the roof hatch and climbed onto the platform, staying low behind the camera mounts. From up there, we could see the scavengers clearly. The one with the gasoline was working at the door, trying to get the liquid into the seams. Ron lit a flare, then dropped it, carefully, onto the far side of the plaza, away from the tower, landing it in the lane near a cluster of abandoned cars. The flare hissed and burned bright. Every infected head turned. A second later, I banged the metal pan once, hard, on the roof platform. The sound echoed down the structure and out across the lanes. The infected didn't just drift this time. They converged toward the flare's light and the sound's direction, flowing across the plaza like they'd been waiting for permission. The scavengers froze. One yelled something, and even from above I could hear the anger in it. They backed away from the stairwell door, suddenly surrounded by a moving problem they couldn't argue with. They tried to hold their ground, but the infected pressed in. Not sprinting, not cinematic, just relentless closeness. The scavengers did what humans do when their plan becomes uncomfortable. They abandoned it. They retreated to their vehicles, shoving each other in the rush. One dropped the bolt cutters. Another lost his grip on the fuel can and it skittered across the concrete, spilling. They drove off in a mess of tires and revving engines, disappearing south. Ron and I stayed on the roof platform until the flare burned down and the infected drifted back into aimless patterns. When we climbed down, my legs were shaking. "That was smart," Ron said quietly. "It was desperate," I answered. Ron nodded. "Desperate keeps you breathing." That night, we didn't talk much. We ate in the dark. We listened to the radio without transmitting. The airwaves carried fear in fragments, people calling for family members, warnings about blocked routes, someone crying quietly before cutting off. At 11:40 p.m., Mason's voice came through, weaker than before. "Caleb, if you copy, we didn't make it to the plant. Road was blocked. We're heading back east, but we're being followed. If you see headlights..." The message broke into static. I stared at the radio like I could will it back. Ron met my eyes. "If they come here, you can't bring them up that tower." "I know," I said, but my chest felt tight. Mason had been the first voice that made the world feel less empty. The idea of him and his people moving through the dark with something behind them made my hands go cold. At 1:05 a.m., I saw headlights. 2 sets, low and slow, coming from the West Service Road, weaving through the abandoned vehicles like the drivers were trying to stay invisible. Behind them, farther back, a third set of headlights, higher, brighter, moving with impatience. Ron and I watched from the booth windows, silent as the first vehicle, a small sedan, slid to a stop near the Plaza office building. The second, a minivan, pulled in behind it, engine off. The third vehicle, the pursuing one, slowed at the edge of the plaza. A gray SUV, the same one, the scavengers. Ron's face went hard. They tracked them. I keyed the radio, careful, low power. "Mason, lights on plaza. Scavenger SUV here, do not approach tower. Do you copy?" Static, then a burst. "Copy. We're pinned near the office building. They're outside." My mind raced. The infected under the overpass were restless but not clustered. Noise would bring them. Fire would trap everyone. If the scavengers cornered Mason, it wouldn't end with negotiation. Ron grabbed my arm. "We can't go down there." "I'm not going down there," I said. "But I can make the plaza a bad place to stand." I took the last 2 flares. I took the metal pan. I climbed to the roof platform again. Ron behind me, both of us low. The scavengers were moving toward the office building. One had a flashlight. Another had the rifle. We needed the infected to converge, but not on the office building. If they converged there, Mason would be swallowed in the chaos too. I pointed to the far south lanes, away from the office building and away from the tower base. Ron understood instantly. We lit a flare and dropped it into a wrecked car near the south lanes. The flare burned bright, reflecting off glass and metal. Then Ron banged the pan twice, sharp, echoing. The infected responded like they had earlier, flowing toward the flare, toward the sound, drawn away from the office building. The scavengers hesitated, suddenly aware that the plaza had changed. One yelled, voice angry, and they backed off, stepping away from the office building to avoid being boxed in. That gave Mason a window. Over the radio, his voice came in a harsh whisper. "We're moving. West side, don't open the tower." "Copy," I whispered back. "Stay low, follow vehicles." Minutes crawled by like hours. I watched shapes move between cars. Mason, the woman, the teen, slipping through shadow like they'd been practicing for this moment their whole lives. The scavengers tried to reposition, but the infected flow forced them wide. They couldn't hold a clean angle without standing in the open lanes. Then something unexpected happened. Ron pointed to the highway shoulder, northbound. A state trooper cruiser, lights off, moving slow, rolled into view. Not fast, not charging. Just there, like a ghost car returning to its post. It stopped near the plaza edge. A man stepped out alone, holding a long flashlight and a shotgun at low ready, barrel pointed down. He wasn't here for Mason. He wasn't here for me. He was here for the scavengers. The scavengers saw him too. They froze, like predators suddenly aware of a larger predator in the same territory. The trooper raised his voice, not shouting, but firm enough to carry. Back away from the vehicles, hands visible. In the quiet night, his words were loud. The infected stirred at the sound, but the trooper didn't care. He held his ground. The scavengers backed up, hands half raised, bodies tense. One of them took a step sideways, trying to angle. The trooper's shotgun came up, still not firing, just warning. "Don't," he said. For a moment, everything balanced on the edge of a choice. Then the scavengers chose survival over pride. They retreated to the SUV, piled in, and drove south, tires squealing just enough to draw infected attention behind them. The trooper stayed still until they were gone, then turned his head slightly, scanning the plaza. Ron and I stayed low on the roof. The trooper's flashlight beam moved across the office building, across the vehicles, across the stairwell tower. Then he looked up, directly at the booth. He held the beam steady for a long second, as if acknowledging that someone up there had been part of this even if he couldn't prove it. Ron whispered, "Don't move." I didn't. The trooper lowered his light, walked back to his cruiser, and drove away northbound, disappearing into the dark like he'd never been there at all. When I finally let myself breathe, my lungs felt like they'd been locked for an hour. Over the radio, Mason whispered, "We're clear. West Road. Thank you." I closed my eyes. "Keep moving," I whispered back. "Don't stop near the highway. They'll circle back eventually." When dawn came, the toll plaza looked the same as it always had. Empty lanes, abandoned cars, gray sky. But I felt different. The booth wasn't just my refuge now. It was a node in a fragile network, voices on radios, people moving between shadows, decisions that mattered beyond my own hunger. Ron sat with his back against the wall, cleaning his hands with an antiseptic wipe like routine could erase what we'd done. "You know what happens next," he said. "They come back," I replied. Ron nodded. "And next time, they bring more people or they bring fire again. or they wait until you're tired. I looked out through the bullet-resistant glass at the highway stretching north and south, a corridor that used to carry commuters and now carried threats like a current. I wasn't under any illusion that an abandoned toll booth could save the world. But it could save a night, it could save a person, it could give someone enough warning to turn back before they walked into the wrong set of headlights. I checked the brace on the door. I checked the welded hatch. I checked the rope descent line, hidden and ready. Then I keyed the radio, listening for voices that might still be alive in the static, and I stayed where height made me hard to reach, because on an empty highway, being hard to reach was as close to safety as anything left. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.